I spent my life keeping the silver polished across 3 estates, watching 3 generations of Kennedy history unfold. 30 years of staggering tragedy. They built their dynasty behind the doors of a Cape Cod compound, a winter retreat in Palm Beach, and a chaotic Virginia manor. These houses saw the rise of America's most powerful political family. But they witnessed something else too. A pattern of loss so relentless, people whispered about a curse. Today, you and I are going to walk these halls together. We will uncover how Mr. Joseph Kennedy picked these properties to craft an aristocracy through sheer ambition. We will see how his 9 children were trained to win, and how those same rooms that hosted presidents eventually stood empty, echoing with memories of those who never came home. Let us start in 1928. I remember the look in his eye when Mr. Kennedy first surveyed Cape Cod, seeing the perfect foundation for a dynasty. He was an Irish Catholic outsider in a world of old Protestant elites. A man who made millions through stocks, Hollywood, and, if you believe the kitchen gossip, bootlegging. By age 40, he had wealth, but he craved respectability. Location was everything. Old money families guarded the coast and despised newcomers. But Mr. Kennedy did not care. He bought a 6-acre waterfront property in Hyannisport anyway. 3 houses total, built with classic white clapboard and green shutters. He knew exactly what he was doing. True wealth in WASP America did not shout. It just whispered quietly from behind manicured hedges. And whisper it did. I used to sweep the porches, marveling at how the estate felt centuries old. The location was strategic, close to Boston, yet secluded for privacy. Mrs. Rose Kennedy took absolute charge. As a mayor's daughter, she mastered their image, shaping those 9 children with an iron will. I watched them from the window. They learned early that Kennedys never lose. Touch football games on the lawn were brutal competitions. Sailing races were pure tests of grit. Serving them dinner was exhausting. The table was a fierce debate stage where you defended your ideas or stayed silent. Mr. Kennedy believed wealth without power was useless. This house was his private training camp, and the waterfront was the proving ground for his future conquerors. I spent decades working the grounds at Hyannisport. Stick with me. We're about to uncover what really went down. Mr. Kennedy ran that place like a tactical bunker, demanding ruthless physical competition. Mrs. Rose balanced his aggression with iron-fisted Catholic discipline and daily mass. The old money neighbors hated us. We were loud Irish Catholic upstarts invading their sanctuary. But Joe didn't care. He was plotting a winter base in Palm Beach. That 1928 purchase was ground zero. The presidencies, the tragedies, the media sieges, it all traces back to this lawn. I used to watch him on that porch, surveying his kids. He only saw future leaders. He couldn't see the dark telegrams or the empty bedrooms yet. He just saw his empire. I swept every inch of those porches, so I knew the compound was built like a military formation. 3 houses on 6 acres. The white main house sat dead center as command headquarters. Mr. Kennedy demanded that when his sons married, they'd move into the flanking houses so he could keep his dynasty right under his thumb. Inside, Mrs. Rose ran the grueling logistics. 9 children spanning 17 years meant I was scrubbing baby bottles while dodging loud teenagers. The house vibrated with endless motion and zero privacy. The kids shared bedrooms, forced to constantly fight for space and attention. But it was the massive dining room table where the true hierarchy played out. Every night, all 11 were arranged strictly by whoever Mr. Kennedy favored most. Serving dinner was tense. It wasn't a meal, it was an interrogation. As I cleared plates, Mr. Kennedy grilled them on politics. Fail to memorize the news and he'd humiliate you. That ruthless streak bled into their vicious lawn football games. I always pitied young John. He was frail, constantly fighting fevers, but still took brutal hits from his older brother. He had to survive using sharp strategy. Down at the private dock, the sailing races were cutthroat. Mr. Kennedy judged who fought hardest in the freezing water. Mrs. Rose backed him up with strict doctrine, preaching that suffering built character. She'd march them to Sunday Mass, ensuring the neighbors saw the perfectly dressed, fiercely disciplined Catholic army she was building. For all her strict rules, Mrs. Rose provided the only warmth. I'd catch her soothing a sick child, softening the sharp edges of her husband's ambition. The summers had a relentless rhythm, morning sports, afternoon sailing, and weekends packed with politicians. But behind closed doors, I saw the cracks. Sweet Rosemary simply couldn't keep up. In a family obsessed with winning, her slow mind stood out. They hired tutors, but the gap grew. At the dinner table, she was lost. Kathleen tried to protect her, but this house was merciless. Rosemary knew she was a flaw in the perfect image Mr. Kennedy demanded. You and I know the horrific price she'd pay for that later. But back then, this place was a brutal training camp where every child was forced to perform on command. My job wasn't just keeping Hyannisport clean, it was maintaining the illusion. You and I know old money despises new, and the neighbors constantly sneered at our loud Irish clan. But Mr. Joe Kennedy did not give a damn. I watched him orchestrate his dynasty. Joe Jr. was the golden boy. I ironed his shirts, knowing the old man was grooming him for the White House. Mr. John was the backup plan. I brought soup to his room, watching a sick boy struggle in his brother's massive shadow. Young Robert was a ghost in the halls, while the girls were raised strictly to become polished wives. This estate was never a family home. It was a tactical training ground. But the boss was restless, already hunting for a winter headquarters. I remember 1933, when the country was bleeding. My own relatives stood in breadlines. But the boss? He saw the crash coming and pulled his fortune out before the floor dropped. He did not suffer. Instead, he weaponized his wealth against the desperate. I was ordered to pack the trunks for Florida. Palm Beach used to be an untouchable paradise for millionaires, but the Depression left those old titans begging for cash. Mr. Kennedy swooped in, securing the stunning estate on North Ocean Boulevard for a fraction of its worth. It featured arched windows, lush gardens, and Atlantic waves crashing outside. Suddenly, my duties split across two operational zones. Summer in Massachusetts, winter down in Florida. The Dynasty had acquired its second fortress. Massachusetts meant scrubbing mud from endless touch football games. But in Palm Beach, the mission shifted. The Florida house demanded pure perfection. I spent hours polishing fine tiles and wiping arched windows. The boss used this southern fortress for classified operations, hosting cutthroat bankers far from northern spies. Madame Rose commanded the staff like an infantry general. Deploying 9 children and our crew across states required brutal military precision. The packing logistics gave me nightmares, but their strategy was flawless. The children mingled with national titans, learning how true power operated. Most importantly, the high walls and thick tropical landscaping gave the family something they never had up north: absolute privacy to execute their hidden agendas. Palm Beach gave Mr. Kennedy the perfect cover. No prying neighbors, just the quiet glasses I served as private associates. For his children, the battleground shifted from freezing Cape Cod waves to warm tennis courts. Miss Kathleen flourished in the grand dances, yet I watched them pack and unpack season after season. The family was an isolated fortress, controlled by the patriarch. The older boys used our estates as showrooms for their power. Then there was sweet Miss Rosemary. Standing by the dining room wall, I watched her struggle. She could never follow the rapid fire of their dinner debates. No matter how many tutors marched through our doors, she could not catch up. By the late 1930s, Mr. Kennedy looked at his daughter and saw only a flaw in his master plan. In 1937, the boss became ambassador to Britain. You and I know what that meant to an outsider: total victory. He left for London, leaving the younger ones with us. Briefly, the houses grew quiet. But his triumph collapsed fast. He spoke against the coming war, praised the wrong leaders, and ruined his name. He retreated back to us in 1940, completely destroyed. He hid in our estates, dodging the press. With his own dreams crushed, he turned those fierce eyes to his sons. Mr. Joe Jr. would have to conquer the world instead. I polished the silver and watched them plot. Hyannisport became their aggressive training ground. Palm Beach was their elegant war room. They built a glittering kingdom, entirely blind to the terrible grief the coming war would soon drop on our front steps. We ran 2 massive estates, serving 9 children programmed for greatness. Everything moved like a strict military operation. But the real tragedy started in our nurseries with Miss Rosemary. As a toddler, she was just a smiling little girl. Soon, the shadows fell. I noticed she fought to hold a pencil while her brothers wrote perfectly. Her steps were clumsy. In a dining room that served as a battlefield of rapid arguments, she was left unarmed. The staff whispered about a delayed doctor at her birth, though we never knew the truth. She could read simple books and chat with me in the pantry, but the fierce strategy of this family was beyond her. The master threw endless money at the problem, marching elite tutors through our halls. It was totally useless. She could never be the flawless soldier his dynasty required. I polished the silver while Mr. Kennedy paced, calculating the threat his daughter posed to his empire. You and I know what it takes to protect a dynasty. Miss Rose tried. I helped dress the girl in silk, watching her mother drill her on parlor conversation like a soldier before inspection. The strain in Miss Rosemary's eyes was obvious. While the boys debated global tactics over roast beef, she just sat there, terrified of holding the wrong fork. By her 20s, she blossomed into a striking woman. That terrified the patriarch. He saw a vulnerability on his flank, an intellectual weakness that could be exploited. In 1941, he discovered a surgical strike, a lobotomy. Experimental, massive collateral risk, but to him, it was a tactical solution to secure his perimeter. He executed the maneuver in total secrecy, keeping the madam entirely in the dark. In 1941, they took Miss Rosemary to Washington. Details trickled back to us staff like grim casualty reports. They kept her awake, severing her mind until her singing turned to senseless babble. A total operational catastrophe. She came back needing an infant's care. The boss immediately exiled her to a facility in upstate New York and later Wisconsin. I was ordered to pack her clothes. The official lie fed to the children was that she was away teaching. Madam eventually learned the truth. I heard her muffled sobs through the heavy oak doors, but nobody ever countermanded the patriarch. We just kept dusting her empty bedroom in silent obedience. She was erased from the ledger overnight. Her name became contraband. Stick with me, because this reveals their core doctrine. Loyalty to the grand design outweighed his own child. He never visited her again, just authorized checks from afar, refusing to face his collateral damage. The perimeter held for decades. We served elite dinners at Hyannisport, treating the estate as a stage for political theater while a daughter was hidden away. The truth didn't leak until the 1960s. Miss Rosemary lived until 2005, 64 years in exile. When the younger siblings finally uncovered the horrific reality of that medical strike, I heard their anguished shouts echoing through the grand corridors, desperate to atone for their father's ruthless decisions. She vanished in 1941. The family closed ranks. The first casualties sacrificed for their image, but not the last. The real war breached our perimeter in August 1944. I opened the door for the messenger. That telegram went straight to the patriarch. His golden boy, Joe Jr., was dead. The master blueprint was shattered. The eldest was supposed to return a decorated pilot, marching toward the presidency. But fate outflanked them. It was Mr. John, the sickly younger brother, who secured the glory first. His patrol boat was crushed in the Pacific, yet he towed a wounded man to safety. I remember polishing the Navy medal he brought home. John became the certified hero, while Joe Jr. watched from afar, seething as his backup suddenly surpassed the primary objective. Walk through these halls with me, and you will feel it. I was sweeping the porch when the telegram arrived. Mr. Joe Jr. always had to be the absolute best. With Mr. John hailed as a hero, the oldest boy refused to stand in the shadows. He volunteered for Operation Aphrodite. They packed a bomber with explosives, planning for him to point it at the target and jump out. On August 12, 1944, that plane blew to pieces in the sky. Nothing was left, no body to bury. I remember the dead silence in the main house. Mr. Kennedy sat frozen in his chair. Mrs. Rose wept in the parlor. We were given strict orders never to touch his bedroom. I just dusted his school trophies and his books. The golden boy of the family was gone forever. That room became a quiet shrine. I walked past that open door every day. I watched Mr. Kennedy age 10 years in months. His fierce energy was deeply damaged. But the tragedies kept coming. Miss Kathleen, the one we called Kick, married an English Protestant against her parents' strict orders. 4 months later, her husband died fighting in Belgium. Now a widow at 24, she refused to come home. She stayed in England, choosing his family over her own. It was a clear rebellion. This compound used to hum with confidence, but that autumn everything fractured. The grand family plan was ruined. Mr. Joe Jr. was supposed to be the president. Now, I watched Mr. John limping through these empty halls, forced to carry the heavy weight of a destiny he never even asked for. I was the one who lowered the lawn flag to half-mast. We poured tea for politicians offering hollow condolences. The chosen heir was gone. You could see the shift in Mr. Kennedy immediately. He turned his intense focus entirely onto Mr. John. The boy wanted to write, maybe teach, but here, you serve the family ambition first. His bedroom suddenly became the headquarters of the new heir. Mrs. Rose locked herself away with her rosaries, gripping her faith like an iron shield. The younger kids watched it all happen. Stick with me, because this is where their famous armor first cracked. Before 1944, they honestly believed they were untouchable. For the very first time, they realized their wealth could not protect them from the grave. That untouched bedroom hung over us like a ghost. It was a heavy reminder of what Mr. John was forced to become. Even as the war ended in 1945, the shadow remained. But let me tell you about Miss Kick. She was my absolute favorite. So bright and never terrified of her father. In London during the bombing raids, she met William. He was the heir to an English duke. A massive estate, centuries of royal blood, but he was a Protestant. To Mr. Kennedy, it was a brilliant political move. To Mrs. Rose, it was a total betrayal. Down in the kitchen, we heard the bitter arguments. The religious rules were rigid. If Miss Kick stood at a Protestant altar, she would commit a mortal sin. But she loved him. She was choosing her own path, even if it meant being cast out. Miss Kathleen's 1944 wedding shocked us all. A civil ceremony entirely forbidden by the missus. Kick chose love over her mother's iron rule. 4 months later, the telegram arrived. Her William was killed by a sniper. We expected her back in her old bedroom, under the master's thumb. Instead, she stayed in England. She was no longer a mere piece on the Kennedy chessboard. The missus sent furious letters demanding her return, but Kick ignored them. She had her own money and freedom. Then whispers reached our kitchens. She had fallen for Earl Fitzwilliam. He was wealthy, charming, and still married. Kick had escaped her cage once, and she did not care about their rules. The scandal shook both continents. Mr. Kennedy raged through our halls. He never cared about her soul. He only cared that her romance would destroy the flawless political brand he was building. I was the one who took the telegram. Miss Kick had gone rogue. Her romance with a married man was a dangerous liability to John's rising political career. I heard the boss shouting in the study, threatening to cut her funds to force a surrender. But Kick shared his stubborn blood. In May 1948, she chartered a plane over the French Alps in a violent storm, defying the odds to secure her own future. The aircraft slammed into a mountain peak. When I handed the death notice to Madame Rose, her grief mixed with cold judgment. She believed God was punishing the girl for living in sin. But the old man shattered. His final tactical play against his daughter was a threat of ruin. Now she was dead, and his fortune could never erase those bitter final words. When Kick died in that plane crash, neither Mr. nor Mrs. Kennedy went to the funeral in England. I told callers it was health concerns, but we downstairs knew the truth. They refused to validate her romance with a Protestant. The English buried her with honors, but back at Hyannisport, her absence settled into the walls, like poor Rosemary before her. The dynasty demanded conformity. Mrs. Rose treated the tragedy as divine intervention, praying quietly. But Mr. Kennedy was utterly broken. He lost 2 children in 4 years, Joe Jr., the golden heir, and now Kick. Serving dinner became a heavy task. I would stand by the sideboard, staring at the table. The competitive energy was simply gone. There were 2 empty chairs now. Death had moved into the compound. Today, you and I are going to unpack this story together. I remember Mr. John pacing the study in his early 30s. This estate was built to forge conquerors, but I spent those years dusting empty bedrooms. We lost Mr. Joe Jr., then Miss Kick. Miss Rosemary was banished to Wisconsin. Only 7 children left. Back in 1948, no one whispered about a curse. Miss Kick defied the family, flew to the French mountains, and paid with her life. The lesson echoed through these halls: stray from the dynasty and you perish. The message to the children was absolute: stay close, obey. I watched this fortress of ambition become a museum of grief. That is exactly where Chapter 7 begins. The rise. John takes the compound. Mr. John never actually wanted the political state. I used to serve him tea while he read, dreaming of teaching or writing. His Harvard thesis became that book, Why England Slept. He wanted to observe, not fight. But with Joe Jr. gone, the heavy crown fell to John. Mr. Joe made it clear, the Kennedy ambition would not die. John's back was ruined from that PT boat crash, and Pacific malaria kept him in constant pain. But the old man turned those scars into a perfect war hero narrative. In 1946, they launched his Congress campaign right from our dining room. I poured coffee during endless strategy sessions while Mr. Joe's fortune flowed. John won easily. By 29, he was a congressman. But his father wanted the presidency. So, in 1952, John went after Senator Lodge. Lodge was exactly the kind of old-money Protestant aristocrat Mr. Joe despised. That 1952 Senate campaign was a brutal war, and our house was the command center. Mr. Robert managed it all, and when John won at 35, it proved our new Irish money could beat their old blood. But John's personal life was a mess of actresses and fleeting romances. Mr. Joe demanded a proper wife for a future president. Enter Miss Jackie in 1951. She was 12 years younger, beautifully refined, and spoke flawless French. Their 1953 Newport wedding was a spectacle, 800 guests and endless silk. But bringing her back to the compound was a shock to her system. Our house was pure chaos, full of shouting, ruthless football matches, and constant debates. Stick with me, because this is where the cracks really started to show. Miss Jackie felt suffocated by the lack of privacy. I watched her cringe from the kitchen window as grown men bickered over touch football scores. The sisters constantly judged each other's dresses, and dinner was just a shouting match of political egos. She'd escaped to her own family's estates just to breathe. Yet when the cameras arrived, the compound worked its magic. I saw them pose on the beach, selling that perfect Kennedy illusion. John's star kept rising. His book, Profiles in Courage, won the Pulitzer in 1956, though we staff knew Mr. Sorensen did most of the writing. By then, Mr. Joe was turning 70. His health was fading, but his obsession with the presidency only grew fiercer. You and I know how heavy a family secret can be. I spent mornings sweeping porches, watching Miss Jackie search for a quiet corner. She craved an escape from the political machine, but that was not how this family operated. Privacy was practically a sin. Mr. John followed his father's footsteps, and we staff saw the women come and go. Jackie knew, we all knew, but the rule was strict. You maintain the illusion. By 1958, the compound became the war room for John's presidential run. Telephones rang constantly. The estate projected nothing but youth and vigor. This place had become the headquarters of a real dynasty. I remember watching old Joe Sr. standing on that main porch, staring out at his remaining children, knowing his ruthless vision was almost complete. Joe Jr. and Miss Kick were gone. Rosemary had been sent away, but Mr. John was a senator now, and Robert was sharp as a tack. We staff watched them turn grief into pure ambition. In 1958, they were certain John would win the presidency. Mr. Joe thought his grand plan was perfectly secure, never realizing our brightest days would soon bring the darkest shadows. Robert needed his own space for Ethel and their growing brood. In 1955, John bought Hickory Hill in Virginia. I packed the bags for Miss Jackie's first visit. She took one look at that massive, isolated Civil War mansion and absolutely hated it. Too far, too big, and she was having a difficult pregnancy. The energy just felt entirely wrong to her. She firmly refused to move in, so John simply sold the estate to Robert in 1957. Mr. Bobby and Miss Ethel fell in love with the place instantly. Finally, they had real space, far from Mr. Joe's critical eye. I was there when the boxes arrived, and let me tell you, they turned the house into pure chaos by design. Miss Ethel brought in animals like a traveling circus. We had a horse wandering into the parlor, dogs underfoot, and even a sea lion in the swimming pool. I spent half my days just chasing their chickens. They eventually had 11 children, and the halls never stopped echoing with loud laughter. It was a joyful, wild disorder, completely opposite to the strict rules I was used to at Hyannisport. Mr. Bobby loved it. He was the quiet one, but here he could finally breathe. Those pool parties were legendary. You were not truly welcomed until someone threw you into the water, fully clothed. Miss Ethel encouraged every bit of it. Rules existed, but I rarely saw them enforced. I was constantly picking up scattered toys and baseball bats. The house felt lived in, loud and messy, never like a museum. When Mr. John became president in 1961, Bobby was made Attorney General. Suddenly, I was serving coffee to political advisors at the dinner table while the kids threw peas. The telephone rang at all hours. Important men in suits stepped over building blocks in the main hallway. The boundary between government and family vanished entirely. Hickory Hill became a second headquarters. The sisters brought their families down, creating deep tension with old Mr. Joe. He wanted everyone strictly under his thumb in Massachusetts. Bobby was loyal, but this house was his declaration of independence. Then, in December 1961, Mr. Joe suffered a massive stroke and everything changed. After the stroke, old Mr. Joe was paralyzed, his commanding voice gone. Without his iron grip, Bobby truly became his own man. I saw it happen firsthand. Hickory Hill became the real heart of their power. I watched reporters arrive, taking photographs of Bobby rolling in the grass with his kids. It showed the public a warmer Kennedy. He raised them without that cruel pressure, giving them pure affection instead. Miss Ethel took the chaos in stride. With 11 wild kids, I was always fetching ice packs or bandages. We joked that the local hospital staff knew us by name. When they played on the lawn, Bobby just wanted them to laugh, remembering the bitter cost of his father's demands. Make no mistake, he still fought fiercely for the dynasty. This estate was simply the one place where he could drop his heavy armor. I spent years serving this family, watching Mr. Robert grow up quietly behind his brothers. By the early 1960s, he carved out his own world at Hickory Hill. Let me tell you, working that estate was a different job entirely. Mr. Joe Sr.'s house was strictly controlled, and Palm Beach was all stiff collars and formal silver. Hickory Hill? Absolute chaos. We staff spent our days chasing dogs out of the kitchen and stepping over muddy boots. 11 children. And the noise never stopped. Yet, watching Mr. Robert smile at the madness on the lawn, I finally understood. He built a home for real love, not just for the cameras. If only we had known how short that joy would last. The dark days were approaching, and none of us could sweep them away. But back then, the house was full of light. You have to picture it, our busy summer retreat suddenly transformed into the summer White House. It was the winter of 1961 when Mr. John took the oath. I remember seeing Mr. Joe Sr. swelling with pride. His grand plan had finally worked. But for us on the staff, the presidency turned Hyannisport upside down overnight. I couldn't even take out the kitchen trash without a Secret Service agent checking the bins. Heavy security fences went up across the lawns I used to sweep. The living room, where I once served the boys' afternoon sandwiches, turned into a secure bunker for national crisis meetings. Every single time we glanced out the parlor windows, there were reporters and flashing cameras waiting at the gates. The magazines called them American royalty, but I saw how heavy that crown was for Mrs. Jackie. She hated the constant noise, and the total loss of privacy exhausted her. I often helped pack her bags when she escaped to Rhode Island, just to breathe without a camera flashing in her face. Little Caroline and John Jr. didn't know any different. To them, the men in dark suits were just part of the furniture. Even the touch football games changed. When I brought out lemonade, photographers were documenting every single pass. The only time Mr. John found true peace was out on the water. I would watch his sailboat drift past the harbor patrols. Out there, with the cold wind howling, he was finally free from the crushing demands of his office. Suddenly, I was pouring coffee for prime ministers and generals. Mrs. Rose reveled in it, finally stepping out of her husband's shadow to enjoy the town's respect. But then came that terrible winter when Mr. Joe Sr. suffered a massive stroke in Palm Beach. When they brought him back home, it broke my heart. The loudest, most demanding man I ever worked for was silenced. I pushed his heavy wheelchair out to the porch every morning. He couldn't speak, but his sharp eyes tracked everything. He watched Mr. Roberts step up to become the president's right hand, taking over the role he used to hold. Hour after hour, Mr. Joe just sat in the salt breeze, trapped in his own body, silently watching the mighty empire he built continue on without him. I poured iced tea, stepping around photographers who treated the lawn at Hyannisport like a movie set. I remember watching Jackie. You and I might think being First Lady was a dream, but I saw her grip the teacups until her knuckles went white. The privacy this family once had was gone, replaced by endless cameras. She took trips to Europe just to breathe without a flashbulb going off. But the children, Caroline and John, they were the real thing. I watched them build sandcastles, unaware of the political machine humming around them. By summer 1963, we staff had the routine down to a science. We knew exactly where the Secret Service men took their coffee and when the press would shout for a photograph. I was the one who dusted that famous rocking chair on the porch. The president would sit there for hours, easing his bad back, surrounded by top-secret papers. From my kitchen window, everything looked perfect. Old Mr. Joe would watch from his wheelchair, finally seeing the dynasty he built running the world. Despite the Cuban Missile Crisis and the growing trouble in Vietnam, Hyannisport felt invincible. The summer of 1963 was glorious. Long, golden afternoons. But September came, and I helped pack the children's trunks for Washington. We all thought they would be back next year, just like always. None of us in the staff quarters knew that within 2 months, the summer White House would become a place of mourning. The golden era was quietly slipping away. Come with me. We are about to walk through the darkest day this house ever knew. November 22, 1963. I was polishing the brass when the compound went dead quiet. Rose had gone to Mass, her daily armor against the grief of losing her older children. Down in Washington, an aide whispered to Ted, sending him rushing for the phones. Here, we were dusting empty rooms. Then the television flared. Shots in Dallas. John was dead. Ted called Rose. She simply returned to church. But Joe Sr. was trapped upstairs. Paralyzed by a stroke, he stared at the broadcast. I stood in the doorway as he wept wordlessly at the sight of Jackie in her blood-stained suit. His boy, his masterpiece, murdered. Within hours, our routine shattered. Secret Service flooded the lawns, radios crackling. The family was coming back. Robert drove up from Washington with Ethel, followed by his sisters. I watched them pull through the gates, the press swarming outside but keeping a respectful distance. Inside, they gathered in the living room. This was the space where I'd served them countless dinners, where Joe Sr. used to relentlessly drill his boys. Now, they just sat in heavy silence. Robert looked completely broken. He and John had run the country together. Ted, the youngest at 29, was suddenly the only son left. The invisible weight on him was crushing. Rose leaned entirely on her faith, whispering it was God's will, refusing to break publicly. But Joe Sr.'s anguished, wordless cries echoed down the hallway. We couldn't console him. 2 days later, Jackie arrived in a black veil with the children, turning our quiet summer estate into a fortress of private mourning. Before and after the funeral, the family returned to us. But the compound felt entirely different. I had to clean John's empty bedroom, and the silence was unbearable. Jackie couldn't stand it. The memories were too heavy. She packed up the children and left quickly. Photographs of John were everywhere, in his rocking chair, sailing, smiling. What used to project power now just felt like ghosts haunting our halls. I watched workmen dismantle the presidential communications gear. The helipad sat empty. We were just a family estate again, but deeply scarred. I'd see Robert wandering the lawns and docks alone, looking completely lost without his older brother. The little ones were too young to grasp the permanence of it all. I remember looking out the window at the flag, lowered to half-mast in the cold wind. Our bright summer house had become nothing more than a memorial. I opened the doors for the endless line of politicians and Navy men, but the main house felt like a tomb. We kept the news crews locked beyond the gates. I brought Mr. Kennedy his morning tea, but he just sat in his wheelchair, tears spilling down his face as the nurse wiped them away. You and I know what ordinary grief looks like, but this was different. I had served this family for years, watching him build a dynasty. Now, it was crumbling. Setting the dining room table for Thanksgiving broke my heart. We all felt the crushing weight of that empty chair where the president belonged. I overheard Mr. Robert in the hall, whispering about walking away from politics. By December, for the patriarch's 75th birthday, there was absolutely no celebration to serve. I packed their trunks for Florida that winter of 1963, hoping the sun would lift the heavy shadow. It did not. I brought towels out to the pool, the very patio where I used to serve drinks while they planned campaigns. Now, the only sound was the patriarch's labored breathing and weeping. Miss Jackie tried to move forward, but I always saw the permanent grief in her eyes. The summer White House was gone forever, becoming just a place of ghosts. By 1968, Mr. Robert was finding peace at his Virginia estate with his 10 children. He had no desire to chase the presidency. But the war in Vietnam was on the television in our staff kitchen, and the men in suits kept coming to the front door, demanding he run. The campaign consumed our household all over again. Politicians insisted Mr. Robert was the only one who could heal the nation. He fought it at first, knowing the terrible cost of that office. But by March 1968, the estate became a chaotic headquarters. We brewed coffee at all hours for reporters. Miss Ethel, pregnant with their 11th child, campaigned right beside him. Back at the compound, I adjusted the television for the patriarch. Confined to his bed, he was forced to watch his last political son step into the exact same danger. Miss Rose spent hours in the chapel praying. The country felt violently unstable. But then came June 4th. I stayed up late in the staff kitchen, listening to the radio broadcast. Mr. Robert had won California. We heard his victory speech ringing out, full of that old familiar hope. The phone rang in the dead of night. The news from Los Angeles hit like a physical blow. Mr. Robert was walking through a hotel kitchen when a man fired a revolver. 3 shots. The nightmare restarted. Mr. Ted arrived to tell his parents. The agonizing sounds from their bedrooms still haunt me. We kept a brutal vigil for 26 hours. On June 6, 1968, Mr. Robert was gone. Within days, the compound flooded with grieving family. I set the dining room table, leaving yet another empty chair. The patriarch was shattered beyond repair. He had built a grand dynasty, only to watch a third son get murdered. While Miss Rose retreated to the silence of the church, I quietly swept the empty halls, wondering how much more this family could endure. The next 5 years felt like a slow collapse. Rose spent her hours in prayer, her only defense as the family was decimated. Then came 1968, and we lost Robert. I stood in the kitchen watching television as Ted delivered the eulogy. The impossibility of a second assassinated brother was etched into his face. When they returned here, the grounds felt cursed. Both boys were groomed for greatness on these lawns, and both were gone. After Bobby died, Joe Sr. gave up. I tried helping the nurses feed him, but the fire had left his eyes. 6 months later, on November 18th, the 81-year-old patriarch died. He had built this mighty dynasty with ruthless ambition, only to watch it crumble from his wheelchair. Now, it was just Rose. At 78, she was left alone in this massive house with her daily mass and the fading echoes of her sons. The silence in the compound eventually became unbearable. I would walk the halls, polishing doorknobs for ghosts. Mr. Joe Jr.'s room was kept perfectly intact. The president's house sat entirely unused. Then Mr. Robert was buried at Arlington. The relentless energy that had kept me running up and down these stairs for 40 years simply vanished. Mr. Ted tried to carry the weight. He was only 36, but the boy I used to fix sandwiches for suddenly looked like an old man. Ethel sold Hickory Hill. She just could not bear the memories of the 10 children they raised there, not without Robert. Palm Beach felt just as haunted. By the end of 1968, our proud dynasty was shattered. Only Mrs. Rose remained here, wandering the empty grounds alone. The houses we maintained so carefully had turned into expensive memorials. 3 fine sons raised in these halls, and only the youngest was left. Ted was never meant to be the savior of the family. He was just the baby brother, the one I used to catch sneaking sweets from the pantry. Now, at 37, the massive weight of the Kennedy name rested on his shoulders. People whispered about his drinking, but we staff looked away. We knew his grief. Then came July 18, 1969. Over on Martha's Vineyard, there was a party for Mr. Roberts' old campaign workers. A bright young woman named Mary Jo Kopechne was there. Late that night, Ted offered her a ride to her hotel in his mother's big Oldsmobile. It was an unfamiliar road, and the night was pitch black. I remember the whispers among the staff the next morning. Mr. Ted had taken that narrow wooden bridge on Dyke Road in the dead of night. The car went over, sinking fast into the freezing black currents of Poocha Pond. He made it out. They say he dove back in for Miss Mary Jo, but the water was too brutal. Down in the dark, she found an air pocket, breathing in that freezing metal tomb, waiting for a rescue that never arrived. Stick with me. This is the tactical failure that haunts us. Instead of calling for help, he grabbed his fixers. When they failed, he swam back. I laid out his fresh clothes at the hotel. He slept for 9 hours while she drowned. By the time fishermen found the car, it was over. 10 hours late, he walked into the station, blaming the shock. The narrative they tried to build was full of holes. Why the 9-hour delay? Was he drinking? In our quarters, we kept our mouths shut, but we knew. The family machine deployed instantly. Lawyers swarmed the island like generals in a war room, executing pure damage control. He took a plea deal, walking away with a suspended sentence and probation. A slap on the wrist. I watched his television address from the kitchen. He wore a neck brace that looked entirely staged, begging the public for mercy. The locals bought it, but the nation did not. Back at Hyannisport, Madame Rose was shattered. I brought her tea, watching her realize this scandal was a stain no prayer could wash away. The press laid siege to our gates. The questions never stopped, and her parents buried their daughter. Her family took the insurance money and walked away, but the silence they bought was deafening. You and I know what really died in that pond. It was the presidency. Mr. Ted was supposed to take the White House in 1972. The public would forgive infidelity, even dirty money, but leaving a girl to drown in the dark? The line was drawn. He became a titan in the Senate, but the crown was forever gone.
I walked the empty halls of the properties Mr. Joe Sr. built to project ultimate power, and I could feel the rot setting in. Two brothers caught by assassins, the third undone by his own cowardice. The Palm Beach estate felt cursed after the old man had his stroke there. Hickory Hill was sold off entirely. We were just sweeping the floors of a ruined empire. The true magic left us when Mr. Robert died. Down at Hyannisport, I kept the fires lit for Madame Rose, but the old competitive energy of the compound was dead, replaced by heavy, suffocating guilt. Mr. Ted carried the ghost of that girl for the rest of his life. I saw it in his eyes when he tried to run for president in 1980. When the reporter asked him why he wanted the job, he completely froze. The drive just was not there. He lived for 40 more years, carrying the weight of his brothers and his own monumental failure. Miss Mary Jo rests in Pennsylvania, her stone praising her loyalty to the family. That loyalty killed her. These great houses were built to conquer the world. Now they are just monuments to a dynasty that destroyed itself from the inside.